and get this presenter on here. I'm going to record it, same as I'm going to do with you guys. And in this case, I'm going to take the information, put it on Facebook, and share it through the Transportation Committee website. Okay. Oh, that's awesome. I really appreciate that. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Susan.
There's nothing, no makeshift lock for either of you, but you're always right.
No, I couldn't do that. Roll call.
That one or is that this one?
Hey, Bob, did you not maybe play? Did we?
I talked to the official.
Dan Banks rolled up. Was there ever a replacement?
This is Joe Dugan now. Joe is consulting engineer. Oh, there's many problems there. Yeah, exactly. Just next week. Everything I needed to know, I've learned. Greg?
I just found our
Okay. Hello. The Transportation Committee, not the Communication Committee.
But I will do my best. I'm gonna go home and scout and see what I misnamed and see if I can find and figure it out.
Not much.
Rearrange stuff so that I can
I'm going to send it to you, and then what?
Well, you know, they just,
What do you know, sir?
I don't know.
Hey, you know what?
I'll sit in the way here.
You just stole my seat, Ryan. You just stole my seat.
Is that you?
That's my seat. I'm just teasing. No.
How you doing?
How are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
Cool.
Am I in the way?
Just both of you.
You're in the way of that?
Especially if it's raining. Sarah, you found us.
I've been out of town every other time. I've been crazy.
God, we thought
I'm
we
like,
got
they're gonna
away
think I'm
from
not gonna ever show up again.
Who spilled the beans and told us what
You told me, you said
Oh,
yesterday in
you were in
court.
the room, weren't you?
I was in the room when you said it.
Steve, we were starting to look at the picture. No, it's
Yeah, I'm sure.
You need to stand.
You can have it. I'll just. Are you sure? There's plenty of chairs.
There, we still have a page. Look for the county.
Right. No, we haven't done that yet. We got that deal worked out. So there'll be much research.
Oh, that is. Oh, we got. So they're saying they don't have they have a wall.
Right. See, I mean, but that outside area, just the interior walls, interior, where they come to the wall, and they use it as a whole way around. Sands there, probably that.
Wall.
And then just.
So it's not like they
Actually, it's kind of on that week.
See, last year, we keep them in the garage and let them come from the light. And then this year,
Oh, yeah.
it's disgusting.
Turkeys are good.
This will be different. It's not like I'm going to use it anywhere, but just for the babies.
Just for the babies. After that, they get us. And
And thought that through.
yeah, there's I mean, when you're yeah, when it's, I mean,
I can't wait. I think
I remember years ago going like this show, but in Johnson City, and he had an almost like a Christian fair. And I know he had a big thing going through the town.
I know Berkeley.
Progress, kind of what you're doing, where you're headed.
So do they sleep in that? Even in the winter?
I can sit without interrupting.
Oh, no.
It ain't no big deal.
Thank you.
When Sunday House was supposed to be 40 down, yeah, one of the boys around the lake.
Everybody wonders, every time you hear somebody go, how could an entire building fall down?
I'll ask you a question. How much do you do tell us for sure? I know that's what they're first.
no, that's my chair. I just need to take a picture and send it to George. Unless you order
Have Lilo Jake.
Oh, I bet.
I'm gonna be in your vicinity.
Is this your chair? Did I take your chair?
Yeah. Sorry.
It's all right.
That's okay. Thank you. But
So what's in Douglas, yes.
Me neither.
That's a good point that Betsy asked earlier. I think she asked it well enough. I'm sitting here, kind of like chemistry class. I know there's a lot of information I don't know, but I just don't know how to ask to get it. But I think it would be helpful for us to be able to look at Kendall County and look at these sensitive areas that we need to be aware of. I think we focused on this primarily for Don's discussion that he brought up a couple of weeks ago about that cut from 46 to 10 in the southeast quadrant. I think it'd be helpful to have similar maps or at least an idea of what we're looking at the rest of the county.
I think one of the flaws of some of the previous work that's been done on transportation is not looking at the environmental perspective first, but rather looking at the engineering perspective and population growth and putting lines down, leaving the environmental for last. And I really like the idea of coming at it from the environmental perspective first, before we actually get into the rest of the conversation.
I think that's a valid point, because so much of the criticism of previous efforts was, okay, you're identifying a recommendation, a spot on a map or what have you, but you haven't done environmental studies yet. So that might render those recommendations moot. So it would make sense to know what we're dealing with up front.
Bob, I like what you, I'm sorry, Don, I liked what you were saying at the, about, we have these property boundaries that we're looking at, regardless of what part of the county it is. Property boundary issues that we're thinking about. There's environmental issues, there's endangered species issues, and I mean, really, it's like you put a bunch of different layers on top of each other and try to find the opportunity that causes the least damage to the things that you care about the most. And to that effect, I wonder if it'd be possible. I mean, there's lots of karst maps that we can get, but are there maps that show specifically the most sensitive areas? I mean, because if you're going to do any kind of development area near some karst, obviously the best thing you can do is avoidance. Just do it somewhere else. That's option one. If you have to do it in some other area, or like where you're actually hitting the karst, then there's some kind of mitigation you can do, or different kinds of measures that potentially minimize it. But I just wonder if there's something we can get from Dr. Vinny, or maybe Donna, that would give us really granular detail to help us look very close and say, this is a specific spot we really should be avoiding, and things like that.
I'll follow up on that comment then. So one of the things he mentioned was the areas that he knows, right? He mentioned the 3 swallets and the 4 swallets, and we don't know, because we have not studied our area as thoroughly as all the dollars that have been spent in studying Camp Lewis and Edwards Aquifer and that type of thing. And we're way behind in the curve. We know that we have those same vulnerabilities, but we don't treat it to the same level of urgency. Bitsy, you mentioned the environmental factors, and I think the number 1 factor is let's not contaminate the water supply. Whether it's us drinking it, the person that has the well 2 miles from wherever that guy went in, or the folks downstream. And so protecting the water supply is probably paramount, because that's what we all need to even live here or anywhere. Getting those studies done, like he was mentioning, if there was a potential or plausible place where we can do a half-mile wide, survey, takes time, and you need the expertise, and you need the money. And I think that this committee doesn't have an allocation of funding to do that at this point. So I don't know what the steps are for you guys to do that, but that would be absolutely the first step, because we don't. When I've talked to George in many conversations, we talk about these swallets, but we know where those are. There's features that are taking things in that we don't know where they are. So you really have to treat the entire area as sensitive. You can't just say, oh, give me 10 feet around that swallet and we'll call it good. This is, widespread. the Lower Glen Rose is mapped very well. We know the extent of it, and we know that all of it is vulnerable. So that's where his talk in the future could help probably, you know. But again, on the first or second slide that he showed the perfect spot would be on that side of Interstate 10, but there's no traffic there. And then you take into consideration the topographic changes, and you know, you're looking at a 20-year project to get a road through those hills and blasting and things like that.
And Donna, can you, my understanding of those types of surveys is that they are generally on the ground. People walking around on the ground looking for features. It's not something you can do aerially.
That is correct.
Right.
It's almost like doing a search and rescue line.
Right.
You
So-
line up right next to each other, you're crawling on the ground, you're going through bushes, because usually it's very dense vegetation, you know, if it's undeveloped.
So then if that's the
It's
case,
costly.
if that's the case, you not only need the money, the time, the expertise, you need access to the land.
You need access to
And
the
so if it's private properties and people don't want you on there, that's a whole nother ball of wax.
Yeah, it gets tricky, And the people that are doing the line have to know what to look for, so you can't have just one person, like a Dr. Benny expert, you have to have multiple people that are trained how to do it.
One of the things that, from listening to all this, first off, second, thanks again for this. This point of this subcommittee to educate us is terrific and it's powerful. But listening to a lot of his comments and things been said here, I want to ask that you at least consider as we move forward a couple of the aspects that could make it manageable for this committee to actually move forward. And that would be, insofar as we can, with very limited resources and time and manpower and all that, think about whether we even need anything through there. If we do, can we, as a committee, pass that as a recommendation with a very strict set of sub-recommendations that this environmental work be done post-haste and be done thoroughly, and let's just get it right. This is not window dressing, we actually mean it. If you're not gonna do it, then it's not a recommendation sort of thing. And secondly, you know, Mr. Wurzbach Parkway here, the idea of a parkway design we've talked about in this community a lot, and in some regards, it's a wonderful compromise if we're gonna do it. People get on 46 and they get off at 10. There's no development going on in the middle of it, and there's no other exposure that wasn't absolutely necessary. So just food for thought if we're gonna do anything over there. There's a couple of ways that we could make a recommendation without having to have $50 million to go do a thorough environmental assessment.
I will make one comment. I know the funding topic just came up 3 different times. One thing Dr. Benny could really shed some light on is the fate of the recharge. Where does it go? Who's the downstream user, downgrading user as it gets subsurface? So, you know, you look at what City of Austin's done west of Austin, you look at what City of San Antonio South has done to protect recharge west of Austin, outside the city limits, in the ETJ, funding protection of recharge features. It's an extensive project, there's been a lot of talk about it, but if you could determine through a massive, I mean, it would be a huge undertaking in itself. If you understood who the end user was, perhaps you reach out to the Edwards Aquifer Authority or City of San Antonio, wherever you determine what this recharge is, who is benefiting, they could and then try to fund its protection up here in the county. Just one back a little bit, and maybe try to pursue funding from other entities. I'll spread the cost around a little bit.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so there's some studies that are out there that suggest that the water that enters recharge in Cibolo Creek is going to the northeast, going towards San Marcos Springs, Guadalupe River, that type of thing. Just like Ryan just said, the dye tracing is exceptionally complicated. As a trustee of the Cibolo Preserve, I've been working for the last 5 years trying to get studies done on the preserve that tell us where this water goes. It's not a master's thesis, and it's definitely not a PhD work. I mean, this is something that would be an interagency, national USGS, I mean, very, big scope project. And it's very complicated, so funding for it has never come to fruition. I continue to work away at it, speaking with USGS now on projects that can help us understand the recharge in the Cibolo a little bit better, but even they are slow as any other bureaucratic entity, to get things moving. So I wish it had already happened. Again, we're behind the curve a lot, but we keep plugging away at it, trying to really figure that out. Whether or not, well, just like, I guess San Antonio, right, purchased a lot of land out towards Uvalde to protect their water source. Would, if we conclusively could say that, 17 billion gallons of water from the Cibolo are going to San Marcos, would that region be willing to, but how would they protect it? How would they purchase land? I mean, so because we're already growing, that could be a long conversation.
Well, as a county commissioner, I'll say, I'm as worried about development in that area as I am, maybe even more so, about development than additional transportation facilities. And our inability to regulate and control that development is very concerning to me, regardless of who is the beneficiary of underground water resources.
And Cow Creek resonates with that. We've been having discussions accordingly. We're trying to find a way to make responsible development. If development is to happen, we want it to be as responsible as it can be, and we're having trouble.
Lance, you had your hand up a while ago.
I'll let Bob go first.
Okay.
Don, just a quick thought. Because there's water involved, water quality, could we possibly access ARPA funds as a springboard, get things started, and then find other funding sources to carry that on?
What an interesting thought, Bob. As you know, we have started that conversation, and we are going to have a facilitated additional conversation with some national experts that may be able to help us fund some groundwater modeling. I don't think it's going to be, I don't know yet. They're working on getting a cost estimate from a hydrogeologist and to see if we can fund it with the county share. And, perhaps the city of Bernie would be willing to join in that. So it remains to be seen whether we can sell it, but it is a water resources deal. There is some money allocated for water infrastructure. And talked with the Hill Country Alliance representative today. Their national liaison said there may be some additional sources of money. So we're going to see what we can find. Let me get to Lyle and then come back. Go ahead, Lyle.
Yeah, as Don was saying, the USGS stuff is limited in Kendall County. It's kind of superficial. They definitely need to get some more funding, and they are whining about not getting enough funding for Kendall County. They're still trying to do it. We've been trying for at least 10 years to get the Cascade Cavern salamander on the endangered species list, but the budgeting process in DC keeps pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off. Another thing, besides USGS, we hear the TCEQ maps are also insufficient in Kendall County. And we suspect the Lily Ranch project is right on top of a huge recharge zone that's never been, hit with, LIDAR or ground penetrating radar. The features aren't very visible on the surface there around Lily Ranch, but a lot of them may be, concealed, by farmers and, other things over the years. I also want to mention, I want to comment a little bit on what Fitzy said earlier about the Northeast Quadrant. After the Southeast Quadrant with at least 83 documented caves, the Northeast Quadrant is probably, pretty close. I mean, you've got about 5 clusters, about 5 cave clusters in Kendall County. You've got the Cibolo Cascade area, but you've also in the Northeast, or roughly the Northeast Quadrant, you've got Kreuzberg, you've got Kendalia, you've got Bergheim, And if you look at some of the TSS maps, which I think are probably right now going to be the most useful to see where some of these recharge features really are, if they'll give up some of that information. Yeah, those areas, those other three areas in the northeast quadrant, I'm sure they've got at least 30, 40 documented caves each, especially around Kreuzberg and Cave Without a Name. It's insane around there. That's my comment.
Well, this has been quite eye-opening today from a completely different perspective. But considering that the vulnerability of our water system overcourse not only will affect people acutely around whatever project would go through there, but potentially for miles around, I do believe that, going the environmental way first, which has been talked about for years, even back in 2010, 11, we all talked about it. If the money's not there, perhaps there could be some sort of GoFundMe page, something that's done for environmental, philanthropists, people who are out there that might not be part of our community but want to contribute. And, it could amount to a good amount of money. It might not amount to a lot, but I do know that there are people out there that are really concerned, and there are deep pockets in Kendall County and the surrounding areas that I think it's important that we actually know what the risks are, because I myself, who suffer from kidney disease, just learning today about the acidity that can happen in this water, or it could potentially cause physical problems for people, that it just is a whole new perspective on this problem. And I truly I think that the roads are in existence, can be developed with turnarounds and as they have in other cities. But anyway, this was really wonderful today that he came. Oh, I'm Felix Deerhart.
I remember you from last
Okay,
time.
awesome, thank you.
I have a question, maybe Donna, is there a central database of all of the cars? Do the cavers have that information, that database that you guys were talking about?
That's
Is that the one?
That's what Dr. Benny referred to, that's what Lance was just talking about. The Texas Genealogical Survey, which Dr. Benny is one of the caretakers of, maintains that. And when a feature is found, that landowner allows them to put it in their database, and then there's a legal document they sign with them that says they will not, release the data, or because a lot of people who have caves on their property don't want the public to know for liability reasons. So they're very, they take that to heart, and they really protect it. So they, like you mentioned, on their website, there's a information request form that has to be done, and then the person that's making the request has to make the case why they're needing the information, what they're gonna use it for, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, that's the way.
And I was just gonna add that it's,
It's not all-inclusive. That's what I wanted to point.
And at least a few years ago, when I was working with that database, the term database is real loose. It's a bunch of file cabinets in a basement, I think at UT, is that right? So it's literally like they didn't want to digitize it, and I think they may have been trying to now, but you have to go down there and pull file cabinets, and you often have to pay someone to go do that to dig up the data for certain counties and stuff. So it's not like they just type in a quick query and hit send on it.
Well, I think George was actually working on that for the last 10 years.
Yeah, so and that was about 5 years ago when I was working with it, so maybe.
They do have a plotted version, and they also have some older reports.
For our county?
Yes.
But again, it's not all-inclusive. I mean, this is just what they know about, because they're not based on those, the data that TSS has acquired has been acquired over a long period of time by cavers, property owners that have called them, because they found something on their property or whatever. It's not based on a comprehensive survey, and that's the limitation that George was referring to in the areas that he was highlighting. That's just what we know. What we don't know is the big question.
what you don't know might be twice as much as what you know.
Right, and we might, you know, find an area and we go in.
I'm being conservative.
An example, there's an area in Fair Oaks Ranch that was plotted out probably a good 25 years ago. And it has, I would say, greater than 300 features, and it's less than 70 acres. So when you actually do the walk-in and you start counting and finding, you're like, whoa, this is like walking on Swiss cheese. So.
All right, we are coming to time for us to close. I'd like to kind of review where we're going to the next meeting and start by saying this meeting was not on our schedule. You may recall we agreed to meet on the first and the third Tuesdays, but because we skipped last week, it just happened. So this is the 5th Tuesday. If we hold to our schedule for the first and third Tuesday, we will meet again a week from today. Everybody okay with that? Okay.
I was gonna try to line up, I was working with Jeff Carroll to try to line up a presenter for that, but I don't know that we can do it in that short timeline. I'll talk to him. The gentleman, it's a consultant that is supposed to be in town anyways around that time. But
For the major thoroughfare plan?
Yeah, so we'll see.
I think it probably would be not enough time. I mean, considering that Monday for most people is a holiday, so there are not many working days between now and then.
Not if you're retired.
I'll check with him though, because. I'll check with him. We're gonna talk, we wanted to introduce this concept. I've sort of been emailing a little bit with you guys about the whole wide nodes, narrow roads. You know, it's an approach that's been used well in Europe and may have applicability in our region, to facilitate better traffic flow with less concrete, actually.
Bitsy is looking for. The what?
The date?
The date is July the 6th. Right. Would your committee, you think, be able to have something meaningful for us to consider in terms of presenting to us some results and what you would like to see in a plan by Tuesday?
We are meeting tomorrow, so come around to the request one more time. You want from this committee to present a summary of the meeting or something else?
Well, I think y'all are coming up with a list of projects, is that correct? At some point in time by the end of July. Would you have a preliminary list of projects that you might say, these are the ones that I think that we're headed towards, and get some feedback from committee members?
Actually, they're included in the minutes.
Okay.
And they're not in an engineering format, it's in a narrative format. So just be mindful that that's from where I come from.
Well, most people should be able to understand them, right?
Yes. With one exception, I still haven't gotten the Southwest map correctly on the minutes yet. So I will amend that. But so yeah, and they're not going to be terribly surprising. They're going to look a whole lot like the things that we have talked about for years. And other than, I would safely say there are very few new roads being proposed that don't already exist. The one being perhaps in the northwest that connects Upper Balcones to Scenic Loop. So that right of way is pretty much there already. So at any rate, yeah, so the minutes clearly have all that narration in there, and we have maps included in that. So
But consider yourself on the agenda. for
Okay,
next-
thank you.
Just go ahead and work that down.
And I think between now and then, Bob and I will spend some time trying to get a hold of some of the appointing entities and make sure that we get this committee either reloaded or reduced, and we can look at that. And if possible, we will see if we can engage AMPO and get an answer on the data. I think that will be enough for a meeting in that short order.
And maybe I'll just add, Bob, you said that, you mentioned that the mayor has indicated, let him know what we want. It might be worth just putting some feelers out as, if there's opportunity to find somebody with some GIS skills, and maybe on the city side that can dedicate, it might be a day of time working on this.
I've done, but I think the precursor to that has to be having our hands on the raw data for this person to use to work.
Sure.
So speaking of raw data, not from AMPO per se, but the TSS that has the data on the caves, it would be nice to have maybe a conversation next time about what would be our specific ask for some data from them. I think that would be very helpful. And if you're gonna talk to AMPO, what Projects Committee has been curious about, and many people have, is what kind of data do they have about the nature of the through traffic in downtown Vernon? Is it a trip outside the city? Is it a trip within downtown? Directionally? And that's the kind of data that we're not working off of. And when we get to downtown Vernon, I think it would be very helpful if we had something that we could look at, because VISD demographics kind of goes dry when we're talking about the center of the city.
Okay.
And by the
I'm not
way-
sure we'll be able to get that by Tuesday.
Okay, so the disclaimer is, most of my team will be out of town next week, but I will forge ahead, and may possibly defer answering a question or two until the big guys come back.
And we won't try to make the decisions, but they can give you some feedback about whether you're on the right track.
Okay, that'd be great.
Second and last chance today for public comment.
Tom Adelstein on Kendall Point, and I thought that was a great discussion. And it seems to me when we talk about all the money we're looking for to do these environmental studies, and you get back to what he says, it almost sounds like use the roads that you have because they're already out there. We have 3351, we have Hurd, maybe a parkway somewhere over Hurd, I don't know. It just seems that maybe sometimes we make it more difficult than it needs to be. And if we're gonna do these environmental studies about a new road, we may be looking at many years before this gets done. The issue, I think, that people and the mayor and the judge wanted was, what can we do now? And that's a lot of what Fitzy has on her list, and I think that's a good focus, and again, he seems to make sense to use what you have. So, thank you for letting me speak.
Ms. Taylor, thank you for being here. Steve, you don't have anything to say today?
Shockingly.
Yeah.
No, but I thought it was a great presentation. Good talk. George worked with us on the Parks project. I don't know if you remember that, where he put together a model to identify candidate landscapes for the county parks. And so if you look at where all the county parks are, those are all model components. George was in that. Rufus Stevens was in that project as well.
Deaver?
Okay. Fitzy was part of this from the 2007 committee. I think he had people that talked to you about the data from way back when and what they gathered. A lot of this discussion that they had in that southeast area was personally going to the landowners and asking them what's on your land.
I don't
You don't
personally know that.
Okay. I know Jack Carroll has some of that from the 2007 stuff. I have some of that from the 2007 stuff because I have Rod Fowler's stuff. And there was a map with red dots on it where they walked the land with the landowners and asked them, where are your features? And a lot of it was, I believe they call them sinkholes. I don't know what the difference is between the swallow and sinkhole, but
I'm familiar with the document you're referring to. And I've been reluctant out of respect for the landowners to make that part of the public record at this point.
Okay, but I'm just telling you, that information, they went to the landowners, they were able to talk to them, and it was part of the maps that they brought out. Am I not right? That there was a map, and I have a map, and it's got the dots on it.
I don't remember.
There's a map that was made, whether it was made for what purpose, for somebody's own convenience or for their record keeping, I don't know, but I don't know.
It was for our study, we were trying to go not where the sinkholes were.
Okay.
And if I can just say, there's a lot of non-authoritative data out there, right? So that's one of the reasons why when George said, these are what we know about, those are authoritative. You know, a landowner probably wouldn't be able to recognize most recharge features on their property.
They
unless
have to
it was a-
be significant.
Yeah, it would have to be a significant.
No, we didn't want this to be out, because you have a lot of people think, oh, I'd like to explore a cave.
Right.
Well, yeah, they do it, and they get hung down there and die, and then the landlord. Do you have a copy of that map?
I have Rod Fowler's copy.
Yeah, I've got a copy of it, but, you know, it's
Not
we
went
can't
anywhere.
publish it, because of that liability.
I think that brings up an interesting point that at some point we may need to discuss. The general public, we've always said this will be open to the public. Would the general public rather only us have access to this map and this be the one thing that does not get published, but we have access to work off of it? Or would they rather us not look at the map and not publish it?
Well, the last time you asked that question, we had like a 6-hour discussion.
Yeah,
In Northern, to add to that, when we go to TSS and ask them for their cave data, I think if we said, you know, it's a small group who wants to have, I mean, they are not interested in giving all the cave locations for Kimball County to us to now then broadcast to the whole public. It's just, I don't think that's going to happen.
And I will say, I don't think it's our job as a committee to sit down with dots on a map and try to put a spaghetti string through and miss those. So while it's interesting information and really good, at some point in the process, I think our conversation be, if you can take the risk and there's no other options, you might consider maybe going in this general area. And so that's the most I see we be doing. Yes, ma'am?
As this map with the red dots on it, I am a property holder where those red dots are, and I will tell you, they're not all the red dots on there are, okay? My property alone has 3 caves, at least 3 cars that I know of. My grandchildren have rappelled down 23 feet into one of our caves. And so it is extensive. And when it rains 5 or 6 inches, that runoff is considerable. And I don't know if y'all have driven down the new extension on Blanco going to 1604, but even though they have huge drainage ditches, that runoff is creating 6, 7 inches of a lot of water when we had some of those big rains in the last few weeks. And so that's just another perspective of where is this water gonna go with some sort of transportation situation? You really don't know. I mean, it changes every day, but there's a lot out there. I know, my grandchildren try calling it all that.
Well, what she brings up bothers me is that the development, I'm talking about subdivision, you know, with their impervious cover, they can double or triple the amount of actual runoff, volume of runoff.
Yes.
Okay. Then you get out like to the Cascade Caverns, it begins to flood. Although you've got a dam to help protect it, it doesn't. Some way or another, we need to get those people to help pay for mitigating the problems they're causing people downstream. You know, I don't know how you do it.
Raise your hand, Don.
Potentially poisoning wells. potentially poisoning wells.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is, I've been rather vocal on this, low impact development. It's not low impact when you put a 45-foot wide lot in the house that are 10 feet apart. That is high impact, high density development. And that causes all kind of runoff, dirt, dog poo, cat, all this stuff, chemicals. That was worse than the transportation. Although the transportation contributes, but these developments are worse than the other. And
Donna?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of comment on that. So there is a swallet. Denise, a swallet is a sinkhole that's located in a creek bed.
Thank you.
So it is a sinkhole, but it's swallowing in the creek. That's right downstream from Herb Road. And when I've done calculation based on flows, if something would spill into Cibolo Creek at Herb Road, if there was a tanker spill or accident in a gas tank leak or something, we're looking at 20 minutes in a decent, like the rain we just had a few minutes ago. If it gets up to 75 cubic feet per second maybe, we're looking at 15 minutes from the time that incident happens until it's going into the aquifer. There is very little response time. So the concerns are not in the future about some future road. This stuff is happening now. And the development that's happening all around, John, is increasing the amount of flow that's going in from all the impervious surface. That's why the Cibolo Preserve works so hard, along with the Cibolo Center for Conservation, to protect and make these buffers, you know, along the creek downstream, because the vulnerability is at our door.
Well, that's just real cheery news to me.
I know, I'm sorry, that's kind of.
Thank you so much.
So, make sure your trash stays in your trash can, and your dog poop stays in the trash can.
All right, thank y'all for being here. We will meet a week from today in the same room. Thank you to the City of Bernie for your hospitality and excellent administrative help.
Thank you.